They were laughing when she walked in. The gym at Fort Bradford echoed with the restless energy of Marines before a big field exercise. Voices bounced off concrete walls, boots scraped against polished floors. Somewhere near the back, someone told a joke about the weather forecast, and the laughter rolled through the formation like a wave breaking on rocks. No one stopped talking when Sergeant Maya Thornhill entered. No one shifted in their seats or straightened their posture. She was just another face in camouflage, another name on the roster, another body filling a slot in the medical support element. She was 29 years old, average height, lean build with brown hair, pulled back in a regulation bun, so tight it looked like it hurt. Her uniform was squared away perfectly. Boots shined to a mirror finish. Sleeves rolled with mathematical precision. But there was no swagger in how she moved across that gym floor. No confidence in her stride that demanded attention. She walked like someone who had learned a long time ago that the best way to survive judgment was to make yourself invisible. The whispers started before she reached her place in formation. Paperwork medic. Never deployed. Heard she froze during a casualty drill. Command had to step in. The words weren't loud, just careless enough to land, just sharp enough to cut. Maya heard them. You could see it in the way her jaw tightened for half a second before relaxing again. But she didn't defend herself, didn't turn to face the voices. She just stood at the back of the formation, hands folded calmly behind her back, chin lifted not in pride but in simple refusal to give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. The silence that followed wasn't respect. It was judgment, the kind that settles over someone like dust on a forgotten shelf. That was the moment everyone thought they had her figured out. They had no idea that within 36 hours, a flooded river would trap 280 Marines on the far side of chaos. That radios would fall silent under the weight of static and storm. That real bullets would tear through the rain-soaked night, and all the people laughing in that gym would be praying someone could reach their wounded. And when no one else moved, when leaders hesitated, when distance turned deadly, she would cross alone. Lieutenant Daniel Foster stood at the front of the formation with a clipboard and the kind of confidence that comes from being just high enough in rank to matter, but not high enough to be blamed for everything. He was 28, square-jawed, with a uniform that looked like it belonged on a recruiting poster. When he spoke, his voice carried the clipped authority of someone who had practiced giving orders in front of a mirror. "Listen up," Foster said, and the noise in the gym dropped to a low murmur. "We've got 3 days in the Serpent River training corridor. 280 Marines, 4 companies. The objective is simple: cross the river, establish forward positions on the far ridge, and hold under simulated enemy pressure." He gestured to a laminated map propped on an easel beside him. The Serpent River snaked across the terrain in blue ink, curving between elevation lines like something alive. "Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta companies will cross in sequence," Foster continued. "You'll secure sectors along the far bank and maintain defensive positions for 72 hours. Engineering will establish rope bridges at designated crossing points. Weather forecast shows a 40% chance of rain, so pack your wet weather gear and don't complain when you use it." A few Marines chuckled. Someone muttered something about Navy SEALs and rubber ducks. More laughter. Foster's eyes scanned the formation until they landed on the support element standing near the back. "Echo Medical Engineering and Command will remain on the near bank until crossing lanes are secure and weather permits. You'll cross only on my authorization or Colonel Reeves' direct order." "Clear." A scattered chorus of voices. "Clear, sir." But one voice was missing. Maya said nothing. She just studied the map from where she stood, her eyes tracing the contour lines marking elevation changes, calculating distances that no one had asked her to measure. Foster glanced her way for half a second, then moved on. He had bigger concerns than a medic who never spoke up. From somewhere in the formation, Private Garrett Hollis leaned toward the Marine beside him and whispered just loud enough for a dozen people to hear, "Good thing our paperwork princess gets to stay dry. Wouldn't want her boots to get muddy." The laughter was quieter this time, more nervous, like people weren't sure if the joke had gone too far or not far enough. Maya's expression didn't change. Her hands stayed folded behind her back. Her eyes remained on the map. But inside her cargo pocket, her fingers brushed against the worn fabric covering a small green notebook. The same notebook her father had carried through frozen hell in Korea 74 years ago. The same notebook that held the only truth she had ever needed. Captain Douglas Thornhill had been a combat medic in the Korean War, 7th Infantry Division, Chosin Reservoir, December 1950. Maya had been 12 years old when she first understood what that meant. She remembered sitting at the kitchen table in their small house outside Fort Benning, watching her father's weathered hands shake as he wrote in the Greenfield notebook. His fingers trembled from old shrapnel wounds that had never quite healed right. 30 years after the war, and his body still carried Korea in every joint, every scar, every movement that took longer than it should have. He had looked up at her that day, eyes distant, like he was seeing something beyond the kitchen walls. Maya, he had said quietly, when you're a medic, every second you hesitate, heartbeat you lose. Every moment you doubt yourself is a life that slips through your fingers. You can't waste them. You understand. She had nodded even though she didn't understand. Not really. Not yet. You'll understand someday, he had said, reading her face. Then he went back to writing, and Maya had leaned over to see what he was putting down in that notebook. Do not waste a heartbeat you can save. He had written it 3 times on the inside cover. 3 times in handwriting that got shakier with each line, like he was trying to carve the words into something more permanent than paper. Douglas Thornhill died when Maya was 17. Heart attack. Quick and quiet the way he had lived most of his life. The funeral had been small, a handful of veterans from his old unit. An honor guard that folded the flag with mechanical precision and handed it to Maya with words that felt rehearsed. Your father served with distinction. Maya had held that flag and wondered why, if he had served with such distinction, no one seemed to know his name. Why the stories of what he had done were locked away in a notebook instead of celebrated in daylight. She had enlisted a year later. Not because she wanted glory or recognition, but because she needed to understand what those pages meant. She needed to know if the words her father had written were true, or if they were just the desperate philosophy of a man trying to make sense of frozen horror. It took her 16 years to find out. 16 years of training, of learning anatomy and pressure points in tourniquet placement, of memorizing blood types in drug dosages and the exact angle to insert a needle into a collapsing vein, of running miles with a medical bag that got heavier with every step, because she kept adding more supplies, more options, more ways to save a life when seconds mattered. And then in 2007, in a place called Anbar Province, in a war that didn't make the news as much as it should have, Maya Thornhill learned that her father had been right. Every second mattered. Every heartbeat counted. And sometimes the only way to save the ones you could reach was to let go of the ones you couldn't. That lesson had cost her everything. Her unit, her reputation, her record. They had buried it all under classification stamps and reassignment orders, and when the dust settled, Sergeant Maya Thornhill became exactly what people saw in that gym at Fort Bradford, a paperwork medic who had never deployed, who had never seen anything real, who had never been tested. The rumor about freezing during a training drill had been planted carefully, whispered into the right ears, spread through the barracks like smoke through a crack in a wall, and Maya had let it spread because the truth was classified, because some stories were safer buried, because sometimes the only way to keep serving was to let people think you had never served at all. She carried her father's notebook everywhere, a reminder of what mattered, a tether to the only person who had ever understood that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about being terrified and going anyway. The convoy rolled out at 0530 headlights, cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like knives through fog. 12 vehicles carrying 280 Marines and enough equipment to sustain them for 3 days in terrain that didn't care about training schedules or operational plans. Maya sat in the back of a transport truck wedged between a stack of medical supplies and a young corporal from communications who looked like he had barely started shaving. The rain had started as a light mist somewhere around the base gates, and now it was a steady drizzle that drummed against the canvas roof with a rhythm that sounded almost angry. Across from her, Corporal Rachel Brennan, another medic, 29 years old, cheerful in that forced way people get when they're trying to convince themselves everything is fine, leaned forward with a laminated map spread across her knees. You plotting our vacation spots, Thornhill? Maya glanced at the map without lifting her head, just seeing where the high ground is. High ground, Brennan laughed. This is a training exercise. Worst we'll see is twisted ankles and some idiot who drank from his canteen too fast and pukes on a forced march. Maya's eyes traced elevation lines on the map, marked potential casualty collection points, calculated distances from the river to natural cover. Water doesn't care if it's training, she said quietly. Brennan frowned, not sure if Maya was joking or serious. She decided it didn't matter and went back to checking her medical bag, mentally inventorying supplies she had already counted 3 times. The truck hit a pothole and everyone lurched sideways. Someone cursed. Someone else laughed. The kind of nervous energy that comes before something big, even when that something is supposed to be controlled. Maya closed her eyes and listened to the rain. She had heard rain like this before. Different continent, different war, same sound. The Serpent River lived up to its name. It didn't run straight. It twisted through the training corridor like something trying to escape its own banks, curling around rocky outcroppings and sandbars that shifted with every season. When the convoy pulled up to the staging area, the sound of rushing water was already louder than the idling engines. Marines piled out of vehicles, boots hitting muddy ground, voices rising in that mix of excitement and complaint that defined military life. The rain was heavier now, turning the staging area into a patchwork of puddles and slick earth. Engineering Sergeant Pete Harrison, 38 years old, 15 years in service, built like someone who had spent his entire adult life lifting heavy things, stood near the riverbank, directing his team with hand signals and shouted orders that barely cut through the noise. Double-check those anchor points. You don't carry you think it is secure. Check it again. Currents running meaner than the forecast said, and I'm not explaining to anyone's mother why their kid drowned because we half-assed a rope bridge. Maya watched from a distance as engineers hammered stakes into the ground and ran guidelines across the water. The river was higher than it should have been, brown and churning, carrying branches and debris that tumbled past like bodies in a current. She stepped closer to the bank, careful to stay out of the engineer's way, and studied the water's movement, how fast the debris traveled, how the current pulled harder and on the far side where the channel narrowed, how rocks that had been visible an hour ago were now submerged under rising water. Harrison noticed her standing there and walked over to rain dripping from the brim of his patrol cap. "You studying for a test, Sergeant?" "Just watching how it moves," Maya said. "Helps to know where the water wants to go." Harrison followed her gaze to the river. "You talk like you've crossed bad rivers before." "Once or twice." Where? Maya didn't answer. She just marked one more mental note: current speed increasing, water level rising faster than weather reports predicted, and stepped back from the bank. Harrison watched her go with the kind of frown that meant he was filing something away for later. Something that didn't quite match the story everyone told about the paperwork medic who had never deployed. The forward crossing began at 0800 hours. Alpha Company moved 1st Marines, stepping carefully onto the rope bridges while engineers held guidelines taut. The bridges swayed with each crossing, ropes creaking under the weight of bodies and equipment. Water churned below close enough that if you slipped, you would feel the cold before you felt anything else. Private Graham Sterling, 21 years old, fresh enough that his uniform still had factory creases, lost his footing halfway across. His boots slipped on wet rope, and for a heart-stopping second, he hung suspended over brown water hands white-knuckled on the guideline. "Sterling, grab the line!" He caught himself, pulled himself up, kept moving. On the near bank, a few Marines exhaled. Someone made a joke about Navy divers. Nervous laughter rippled through the formation. Maya stood with the medical element far enough back that she wasn't in anyone's way, but close enough to see every crossing. She watched Sterling reach the far bank and drop to his knees in mud, breathing hard. She marked him mentally: young, panics under pressure. Watch him. Bravo Company crossed next, then Charlie. The operation ran smoothly, professionally, exactly the way training exercises were supposed to run. But the rain didn't stop, and the river didn't care about professionalism. 2 hours in the water had risen 6 inches. Rocks that had been stepping stones were now hidden hazards. The current that had been manageable was now something that pulled at the rope bridges hard enough to make engineers nervous. Sergeant Harrison stood near the command post, radio in hand, reporting to Colonel Thomas Reeves. "Sir, water levels rising faster than predicted. Guidelines are holding, but we're at maximum strain. Recommend we suspend crossings until the river stabilizes. There was a pause. Static. Then Reeves' voice calm and measured. Complete Delta Company's crossing, then hold. No additional crossings until I give the order. Copy that, sir. Delta Company moved across in tight formation, every Marine focused on the ropes, the rocks, the distance between themselves and the far bank. By the time the last Marine crossed, the rain had turned from steady to heavy, and visibility had dropped to maybe 50 meters through the gray curtain of water. 280 Marines were now on the far side of the Serpent River, and on the near bank, Maya Thornhill stood in the rain with a support element, watching the water rise and thinking about things people hadn't asked her to think about. Evacuation routes, high ground for casualty collection points, how long someone could survive in that water if they fell in, how long before hypothermia set in, how long before a rising river became something you couldn't cross at all. She pulled out her laminated map and marked notes with a grease pencil. Corporal Brennan walked over curious. What are you doing mapping evac routes? Brennan blinked. Nobody asked you to do that. I know. You think something's going to happen. Maya looked at her. Rain dripped from Brennan's nose, and her eyes held that mix of hope and fear that comes from wanting to believe everything will be fine while knowing that nothing in life guarantees fine. I think, Maya said carefully, that it's better to have a plan you don't need than to need a plan you don't have. Brennan nodded slowly, thought about that, then walked away without another word. The first indication that something was wrong came 2 hours later. The rain had settled into a rhythm, not heavy enough to stop operations, but persistent enough that everyone was soaked through. Marines on the far ridge had established positions and were running through simulated contact drills. Radio chatter was steady, professional, routine. Then the static started. It crept in slowly at first. Just a crackle at the end of transmissions. A word cut off mid-sentence. Nothing alarming, just annoying. Corporal Tyler Brennan, Rachel's younger brother, 24 years old communications specialist, with the kind of confidence that came from believing technology always worked, sat at his radio station, adjusting frequencies and cursing under his breath. Alpha 1, say again you're last. You're breaking up. Static. Bravo 3, confirm your grid coordinates. More static. A fragment of a voice. 3-7. Then nothing. Tyler cycled through frequencies, checked connections, tapped the side of the radio with the flat of his hand, like that might fix whatever the weather and terrain were breaking. Lieutenant Foster walked over to rain streaming down his face. What's the problem, Brendan? Losing signal strength with the forward companies, sir. Could be atmospheric interference from the storm, but this is unusual. We should have better comms than this. Foster frowned. Keep working on it, and let me know if it gets worse. Yes, sir. It got worse. By 1300 hours, transmissions from the far ridge were 50% static. Commands had to be repeated. Reports came through in fragments. The confident rhythm of military communications was breaking down into frustration and guesswork. And then Colonel Reeves received a call that changed everything. He stepped out of the command tent with a satellite phone pressed to his ear, his face unreadable. But when he came back, something in his posture had shifted. His jaw was tighter, his movements sharper. He called Foster and the senior staff into the tent. Their voices were low, but fragments carried on the wind to anyone standing close enough. Unauthorized presence detected. Not part of the exercise script. Possible hostile elements. Maya was standing close enough. She heard enough. And in that moment, she understood that this had stopped being training. The intelligence briefing was short and brutal in its simplicity. A reconnaissance drone operating in the area had detected vehicle movement 2 kilometers west of the training corridor. Thermal signatures. 3 vehicles, possibly more. Movement patterns inconsistent with the opposing force playing the role of enemy in the exercise. The vehicles belonged to a militia group that federal authorities had been monitoring for weapons smuggling. Anti-government extremists who operated in the national forest bordering the training area. Survivalists, separatists, the kind of people who saw a military training exercise on land they considered theirs as a personal insult. They had detected the presence of Marines, and they had responded. Colonel Reeves stood in the command tent, staring at the map with the kind of stillness that comes from making calculations no one wants to make. Forward elements are to maintain defensive positions, he said quietly. No offensive action. We are not engaging American citizens on American soil unless fired upon. Is that clear? Yes, sir, Foster said. But if they engage, we respond appropriately. But we do not escalate. We contain. We document. And we wait for federal authorities to handle this. Foster nodded, but his hand was shaking slightly when he reached for the radio. The call went out to the forward companies. Possible external contact, not exercise enemy. Maintain positions. Do not engage unless fired upon. For 5 minutes there was silence. Then a voice cut through the static, sharp and urgent. Alpha 2 to command, we have visual on unknown personnel. Ridge northeast. They're armed. The transmission cut off. Another voice. Bravo 1 possible vehicle movement, unidentified static. Then the sound that everyone recognized instantly, even through a radio speaker. Gunfire. Not the flat crack of training blanks. The sharp, echoing snap of live rounds cutting through wet air. Contact, 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 taking fire. Not exercise rounds, repeat. Not exercise rounds. The transmission dissolved into static and chaos. In the command tent, every person froze. For 3 seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. Then Reeves grabbed the radio. All forward elements take cover and report casualties. Engineering assess crossing viability for emergency evacuation. Medical standby for. The radio crackled with overlapping voices. Multiple wounded. Cannot move 2 casualties. Arterial bleeds. Need medical now. Maya heard it all. Standing just outside the command tent, rain pouring down her face, medical bag already on her back. She heard the fear in those voices. The desperation. The kind of calls that every medic knows means someone is watching a life drain away and doesn't have the training or the tools to stop it. Her hand moved to her cargo pocket. Touch the green notebook. Do not waste a heartbeat you can save. She looked at the river. Brown water churning, higher now than when they had arrived. Angry. She looked at the command tent where officers were making decisions based on risk assessments and operational protocols. And she understood with absolute clarity that protocols were about to let people die. Sir, request permission to cross the river with medical supplies. Maya stood in the entrance of the command tent, water streaming from her uniform. Her voice was calm, level, the kind of calm that comes from having already made a decision and just waiting for someone else to catch up. Colonel Reeves turned to look at her like he was seeing a ghost. Sergeant Thornhill. Yes, sir. I can cross via raft with emergency medical equipment. Stabilize casualties until weather permits helicopter evacuation. Reeves stared at her, then at the river, then back at her. That river will kill you in 3 minutes, Sergeant. Private Webb has less than 20 minutes without intervention, Maya said quietly. 4 others won't see dawn. I'm not asking permission to save everyone. I'm asking to save the ones who will die while we wait for conditions that won't come. Lieutenant Foster stepped forward. Sir, she's right about the timeline. Webb especially won't make it. Reeves's jaw worked like he was chewing on words that tasted bitter. Sergeant, I will not authorize a suicide mission. You're one medic. You can't save everyone, and I will not lose you trying. With respect, sir, Maya said, and her voice was still calm, still level, still terrifyingly steady. I'm not trying to save everyone, just the ones who are dying right now. Reeves shook his head. Request denied. We wait for the helicopters. Maya stood there for 3 seconds. Then she saluted. Sharp, clean. Understood, sir. She turned and walked out into the rain. Foster watched her go. Where's she going? Reeves didn't answer. He was staring at the map, at the blue line of the Serpent River, at the positions marked on the far ridge where 280 Marines were pinned down by a threat nobody had planned for. Outside, Maya walked toward the riverbank. Not fast, not slow, just walking with purpose. She found the small inflatable raft that engineering had prepped as a contingency asset, started dragging it toward the water. Sergeant Harrison saw her and jogged over, alarm on his face. Thornhill, what are you doing? Getting a closer look at the river. The colonel said he wouldn't authorize it. He didn't order me to stand down. Harrison stared at her. That's a thin line you're walking. Maya kept dragging the raft. Can your ropes hold a single raft tether anchored from that tree and that truck? Harrison looked where she pointed, did the math in his head. Probably. If we double line it and angle the "why are you asking me this?" Because I need to know if it's possible. Thornhill. Said it, Maya said quietly. If they tell you to cut me loose, you can, but give me one shot first. Harrison opened his mouth, closed it, stared at this woman who everyone said had never deployed, had never seen combat, had frozen during training, and saw something in her eyes that made him believe every word she had said was a lie. You're going to die in that water, he said. I know the risks. Then why? Because someone has to. There are moments when people say yes to things they don't understand because something in the other person's eyes tells them resistance won't change the outcome. This was one of those moments. Harrison swore under his breath. Then he turned to his team. Rodriguez, Sterling, get over here. We're rigging an anchor line. They ran rope around the tree through the tether ring and back to the truck. Built a crude but strong anchor system that would hold maybe if the current didn't rip it apart first. Lieutenant Foster arrived before they finished. Colonel Reeves one step behind him. What is happening here? Reeves demanded. Putting an anchor, Harrison answered, for one raft only. Maya stood with the bowline in her hands, boots already half submerged in the cold river edge. Night was falling fast. Light was fading. In 30 minutes it would be full dark. I did not authorize this, Reeves said, and his voice was steel. Maya looked at him. Rain slid down her face like tears, but her eyes were dry. Sir, they called for medical, not more firepower. If I don't go now, we're discussing bodies later. You are one medic sergeant. You cannot fix everything on that ridge. I don't have to fix everything, she said softly. I just have to stop the worst bleeding before it's too late. Silence. Just rain and rushing water and the weight of a decision that would define everyone standing on that bank. Your orders stand, Reeves said finally. This is not sanctioned. I will not sign off on this risk. Maya nodded. She had expected nothing less. She stepped into the raft, keeping her weight low and centered. Cut her loose if the current overpowers the anchor, Reeves said to Harrison. I will not lose more people trying to save one. Maya heard him. She adjusted her grip on the paddle and looked downstream, tracing the arc she would ride if the rope snapped. Already calculating drift. Already mapping where the current would spit her out. A young Marine standing nearby, Private Hollis, the one who had mocked her in the gym, watched with wide eyes. You've done this before, he whispered. Maya didn't answer. She just pushed off. The river grabbed the raft immediately, yanked it away from the bank with a hunger that felt personal. The rope went taut, singing under the strain. For a moment, it looked like it might snap right then, but it held. Maya kept the raft angled slightly upstream, using the paddle not to fight the current, but to ride along the path she had predicted. The water slammed against the side, spraying over her legs, soaking her to the waist. She stayed low, every muscle wired, every movement controlled. Halfway across debris, a massive log slammed into the anchor rope. The line twisted. The raft went into a sharp spin. For a second, Maya was facing downstream, facing nothing but black water and violence. She dug the paddle into the current. 3 strokes. Fast. Precise. Used the spin's momentum to swing herself into a new trajectory that arced closer to the far shore. On the near bank, Harrison whispered, Jesus Christ. She just corrected that spin with pure technique. The raft hit the far bank hard. Maya grabbed a low branch, pulled herself out, rolled onto mud. She lay there for 5 seconds, breathing hard, water streaming from her uniform. Then she stood, grabbed her medical bag, and disappeared into the darkness. From the near bank, Private Hollis stared at the spot where she had vanished. She's not who they said she was, he whispered. No one argued with him. And in the rain and the growing darkness, with 280 Marines trapped on the far side of chaos, Sergeant Maya Thornhill moved toward the sound of gunfire. Because some debts get paid forward through generations. Because her father had crossed frozen hell in Korea to save a man named Thomas Webb. And tonight that man's grandson was bleeding out in the mud. History was repeating. And Maya Thornhill refused to waste a single heartbeat. The river tried to kill her 3 more times before she reached the far bank. The first attempt came when the current shifted without warning, throwing the raft sideways into a submerged boulder. The impact jolted up Maya's spine hard enough to blur her vision. Water exploded over the bow, flooding the raft to her knees. For 2 seconds, she was blind, drowning in spray and darkness, the rope singing with tension that sounded like a scream. She didn't panic. Panic was a luxury for people who had time to feel fear. Maya had maybe 8 seconds before the next wave hit, and 8 seconds meant the difference between reaching the far bank and becoming another body the river claimed. She shifted her weight hard to the left, forcing the raft to tilt away from the boulder. The paddle became an extension of her arms as she drove it into the water with everything she had. Once, twice, 3 times. Each stroke timed to the rhythm of the current, reading the water like a language she had learned in a different war, in a different river, when she had been younger and the stakes had been just as high. The raft slid past the boulder with inches to spare. The second attempt came when a tree branch thick as a man's torso came tumbling downstream like a battering ram. Maya saw it 3 seconds before impact. Not enough time to avoid it, only enough time to brace. She dropped flat in the raft, making herself small, and the branch scraped over her back with enough force to tear fabric. She felt the rope anchor catch on. The branch felt the sudden stop that meant the current was about to swing her in a circle that would end with the raft flipping. But Maya had done this before. In Anbar province, in the Euphrates River. In 2007, when the night was lit by tracer fire and the water was warmer but just as violent, she knew that fighting the spin would kill her. So she didn't fight. She used it. She dug the paddle into the water on the downstream side and pulled hard using the branch's momentum to swing the raft in a controlled arc that brought her closer to the far bank instead of spinning her into chaos. The branch released. The rope snapped back into position, and Maya was still alive. On the near bank, Sergeant Harrison watched through rain and darkness and whispered to no one, "That's not luck. That's training." The third attempt came when Maya was 15 meters from the far bank, close enough to see the muddy shore, close enough to believe she might actually make it. That's when the rope anchor point on the near bank shifted. The truck it was tied to had been sitting on ground that was quickly turning to mud. The anchor rope, under constant strain from the current and Maya's weight and the river's relentless pull, was dragging the truck forward, inch by inch, slowly but inevitably. Harrison saw it happen, shouted orders. His team scrambled to resecure the truck, jamming rocks under the tires, adding a second anchor line. But it was too late. The rope went slack for half a second, and in that half second, the current grabbed Maya's raft with both hands. She shot forward, accelerating it downstream, the raft spinning as the current took full control. The far bank blurred past. She was going to miss the landing zone, going to be swept into the rapids downstream where the river narrowed and the rocks waited like teeth. Maya had 3 seconds to make a decision. She made it in one. She drove the paddle straight down into the rocky riverbed with all her strength, using it like a pole vault. The paddle caught, held for one precious moment, and Maya used that moment to throw herself sideways out of the raft toward the bank. She hit the muddy shore hard. Her shoulders screamed, her ribs protested, but her hands found a root, then a rock, then solid ground, and she pulled herself up and away from the water that was still trying to drag her back. The raft released from her weight, spun away downstream, and disappeared into darkness. Maya lay on the bank for 5 seconds, chest-heaving water streaming from her uniform. Everything hurt, but she was alive, and that was enough. She stood, grabbed her medical bag, and ran toward the sound of gunfire. Because 28 minutes had passed since the first call for a medic, and in combat medicine, 30 minutes was the line between saving a life and documenting a death. She had 2 minutes. The gunfire was sporadic now. Not the sustained combat that meant a coordinated attack, but the nervous shooting that happened when scared people with weapons couldn't see what they were aiming at. A shot from the left, a burst from the right, return fire that lit up the darkness in brief strobing flashes. Maya moved through the trees like a ghost, low, fast, using cover without thinking about it. These were reflexes carved into her nervous system in a desert thousands of miles away, in a war that officially she had never fought. She found the first casualty collection point behind a fallen tree where the bark had been shredded by bullets. 3 Marines huddled there. 2 of them were working frantically on a third, who lay on the ground with blood turning the mud around his leg black. Lance Corporal Blake Sutton looked up when Maya dropped to her knees beside them. His face was pale, his hands were shaking, and his eyes held the kind of terror that comes from watching someone die and not knowing how to stop it. "Oh, thank God, a medic," he stopped, stared. "Thornhill." Maya didn't waste time on his shock. She looked at the wounded Marine. Private Marcus Webb, 22 years old, fresh from infantry training. His grandfather's face probably smiled from a photograph in his wallet. Rowan, right now, a photograph taken in Korea 74 years ago, when Thomas Webb had been young and the world had been different. Femoral artery, Maya asked. Yes, Sutton stammered. We tried pressure, but you're pressing too wide. You're spreading the bleed, not stopping it. Maya moved Sutton's hands, repositioning them. Here, narrow, hard. Directly on the vessel. She tore open her individual first aid kit with practice speed, pulled quick clot combat gauze, the kind that costs $200 a pack and saves lives that are worth more than money can measure. Webb's pulse was 130 beats per minute, too fast. His skin was cold and clammy. Shock was setting in. He was bleeding out faster than his body could compensate, and in maybe 5 more minutes his heart would just stop trying. Maya packed the wound with gauze, driving it deep into the torn tissue. Then she layered another cloth over it and applied pressure that made Webb groan through clenched teeth. Webb, Maya said, her voice cutting through his pain. Marcus Webb, stay with me. His eyes flickered open, unfocused, confused. Your grandfather was Thomas Webb, 7th Infantry Division. December 1950. My father saved his life at the Chosin Reservoir. Took 3 hours in frozen hell to stabilize his gut wound. Webb blinked. The words penetrated through the pain and shock. That man got to go home, Maya continued, working as she spoke. He got to have children. One of those children had you. You exist because a medic named Douglas Thornhill refused to give up on your grandfather. You understand what I'm telling you? Webb nodded weakly. I am not letting you die tonight. That's a family debt, and I'm collecting. You hold on, you fight, you stay conscious. Can you do that? Yes, Webb whispered. Ma'am. Maya improvised a tourniquet from his own belt and her medical scissors used as a windlass. She tightened it until the bleeding stopped completely, then marked the time on his forehead with a grease pencil, 1847 hours. She looked at Sutton. His eyes were wide. His whole worldview had just shifted. Get him to high ground, Maya ordered. 50 meters north. There's a natural rise that helicopters can land on. Move him now. You just saved his life, Sutton said. Not yet, but I will. Go. They lifted Webb and moved, and Maya turned to find the next casualty. She found 7 more in the next 20 minutes. Private First Class Connor Vaughn with a sucking chest wound where a round had punched through his left lung. Maya used his torn poncho and duct tape from her kit to create a chest seal, positioning him on his left side so his good lung could work without the wounded one dragging it down. Corporal Ryan Ashford with shrapnel in his shoulder and neck from a ricochet off a tree. Maya extracted the visible pieces, careful to avoid the carotid artery that pulsed just millimeters from the largest fragment, packed the wounds, and administered morphine through an auto-injector that hissed against his thigh. Sergeant Patrick Colby with a concussion from being thrown backward when a round hit the tree beside his head. He kept trying to stand to lead his men, and Maya had to physically hold him down. Stay down, you're concussed. Moving makes it worse. I need to lead. Your men need you alive. I'll handle things. Lie down. Something in her voice, the absolute authority, the command presence that came from somewhere deep and trained and tested, made him comply. Yes, ma'am. She worked methodically, efficiently. Every movement was economy. No wasted motion, no hesitation. This was what she had been trained for. This was what her father's notebook had prepared her for. This was why she had crossed that river alone. She mentally categorized casualties as she worked. Immediate, delayed, minimal, expectant, red, yellow, green, black. The colors of triage. The arithmetic of who lives and who dies when you don't have enough hands or time or supplies to save everyone. Tonight, thank God, there were no black tags. No one so far gone that all she could offer was morphine and presence while they faded. But red tags were mounting, and helicopters were still grounded, and the river was still rising. She gathered the walking wounded Marines with minor wounds who could still function and organize them. Stack the immediate casualties near that rise. If helicopters come, they'll hit elevation first. Walking wounded form a perimeter. You can still shoot if you need to. Minimal casualties help carry supplies. They obeyed without question. Because Maya wasn't asking, she was leading. And leadership in combat doesn't care about rank. It cares about competence. She hung IV bags from low tree branches using rocks as counterweights, turned torn uniforms into bandages, used branches as splints, repurposed every piece of equipment she could find because medicine in places like this rarely comes in clean packages with instruction labels. A Marine she had treated earlier, Lance Corporal Sutton, the one who had been working on Webb when she arrived, approached her with something like awe on his face. Sergeant Thornhill, I'm sorry for what I said before, back at Bradford. You're incredible. Maya didn't look up from the IV line she was threading into Corporal Ashford's arm. Save your breath. You owe me nothing. Just stay alert and follow instructions. How did you learn all this? Where were you deployed? Maya finished securing the IV line. Then she looked at him. Her eyes held something that made him take an unconscious step backward. I was deployed to places that don't exist in official records, she said quietly. I learned this by doing it before when people were dying and no one was watching, and the only thing that mattered was keeping hearts beating. She turned back to her patient. Conversation over. But Sutton stood there for 5 more seconds, processing, understanding, slowly dawning that every joke he had made, every assumption he had carried, had been built on lies that someone had carefully constructed. The radio on Maya's vest crackled. She keyed it. Echo command, this is Thornhill on Far Bank. I have 18 casualties triaged. 5 immediate, 13 delayed or minimal. Request medevac as soon as weather permits. Over. Silence on the other end. Static. Shock, maybe. Then Colonel Reeves's voice tight with something between anger and disbelief. Thornhill. How did you? I crossed via raft, sir. Casualties are stabilized. I need evacuation priority on 5 criticals within 2 hours, or we lose them. Can helicopters fly? A pause. Maya could almost hear the colonel working through his fury at her disobedience and his relief that someone competent was with the wounded. Stand by. Another voice cut in, deeper, older, a voice Maya hadn't heard in 17 years but recognized instantly. This is Shepherd 1 medevac flight of 2 inbound, your position ETA 45 minutes. Weather window opening. Be advised landing zone needs to be marked and secured. Over. Maya's hand froze on the radio. The world contracted to just that voice and the flood of memories it unleashed. Anbar Province, 2007. A different river, a different war. The same voice on the radio saying almost exactly the same words. Dust Devil 3, this is Shepherd 6. I'm extracting you and your casualties. 15 minutes, mark your LZ and hold on. She had been Dust Devil 3 then. Call sign for the medical attachment to a unit that officially never existed. A unit called Cobra Dust, Task Force Sierra Echo. Black operations so deeply classified that even the classification level was classified. Her hand was shaking. She forced it to stop. Keyed the radio. Shepherd 1, this is... She paused, took a breath, made a decision. This is Dust Devil 3. Copy your inbound. LZ will be marked and secured. Over. The silence on the other end lasted 5 seconds. 5 seconds that felt like years. Then, Dust Devil 3, confirm your identity. Over. Thornhill, Maya Thornhill, formerly Specialist Thornhill Cobra Dust Medical Attachment Task Force, Sierra Echo. Over. Another silence. Longer this time. Copy that, Dust Devil. 17 years. Thought you disappeared. I did, sir. Paperwork reassignment. Until tonight. Understood. Shepherd 1 inbound. Out. Maya lowered the radio. Her hand was steady now, but her breathing was faster than it should be. Around her, Marines who had overheard the exchange were looking at each other with dawning understanding. Corporal Ashford, the one with shrapnel wounds, spoke carefully. Cobra Dust was a ghost unit, black operations during the Iraq surge, medical attachment to intelligence assets, places so classified they burned the maps afterward. Sutton stared at Maya. You were special operations. Maya didn't answer. She just stood and walked to the natural rise that would serve as a landing zone. Started directing Marines to clear debris, mark boundaries with chem lights, prepare for helicopter landing. But the question hung in the air like smoke. Who was Sergeant Maya Thornhill really? And what had happened 17 years ago that made her disappear into paperwork and silence? The answer was coming in 45 minutes. On a helicopter flown by the only man who knew the whole truth, 45 minutes felt like days. Maya worked nonstop, checking vitals, adjusting IV drips, repositioning casualties to prevent pressure sores and maintain airways. Talking to the conscious ones, reassuring them, keeping them focused on breathing on, staying awake on, holding on just a little longer. The gunfire had stopped. Whatever militia group had stumbled into this training exercise had apparently decided discretion was the better part of survival and melted back into the forest. Or maybe federal authorities had moved in. Or maybe they had simply gotten scared when they realized they had just shot at United States Marines, and that reality had consequences. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the shooting had stopped, and Maya's casualties were stable, and helicopters were coming. She heard them before she saw them. The distinctive thump, thump, thump of rotor blades cutting through wet air. Two Blackhawks appearing through the mist like mechanical angels. The landing zone had been cleared. Chem lights marked the boundaries. Walking wounded formed a perimeter. Immediate casualties were positioned closest to where the helicopters would land. The first Black Hawk touched down rotor wash, blasting rain and mud in every direction. The second landed 30 meters away. From the first helicopter, a figure stepped out. Tall, gray-haired, late 50s. Weathered face that had seen too many wars and too many bodies. Army combat uniform with insignia that marked him as a commander. 30 years of service written in the lines around his eyes. Commander James Shepard. He walked toward the casualty collection point with purpose. His crew followed, ready to start loading wounded. But Shepard stopped when he saw Maya. She was kneeling in the mud beside Private Webb, one hand maintaining pressure on his IV line, the other checking his pulse. She didn't look up when Shepard approached. Didn't break her focus. Shepard stopped 3 feet from her, came to attention, and saluted. It was a slow salute, deliberate, respectful, the kind of salute you give when words aren't enough. Every Marine who saw it understood instantly that something significant was happening. Commanders don't salute sergeants. Not like that. Not unless there's a story behind it that changes everything. Maya finished checking Webb's pulse. Then she looked up. Rain streamed down her face. Mud covered her uniform. Blood stained her hands. She returned the salute. Brief. Professional. "Permission to evacuate your casualties, Sergeant," Shepard asked. "Granted, sir. Priority order Webb first, then Vaughn, then Ashford. I'll direct loading for optimal patient positioning." "Your triage order is my evacuation order," Shepard said. Then he turned to his crew. "You heard the sergeant. Thornhill is in command of patient prioritization. Her word is final." The crew chiefs nodded and moved to the casualties. They knew better than to question a commander's direct order. Maya stood and began directing the loading. Her voice was calm, clear, confident. "Webb first. Lift the litter level. Watch his IV line. It's threaded through his sleeve. Keep his leg elevated. He's had morphine, so he'll be disoriented but responsive." The crew followed her instructions exactly. "Vaughn next. Keep him on his left side. Do not position him on his back, or the chest seal might fail. His airway is compromised, so monitor his breathing constantly." They moved with precision, treating her directions like gospel. Webb was being loaded when he reached out weakly and caught Maya's hand. "Your father," he whispered. "He really saved my grandfather." Maya squeezed his hand gently. "Chosen Reservoir, December 1950. 3 hours in temperatures that should have killed them both. Your grandfather lived to have children. One of those children had you. You exist because a medic refused to give up." Webb's eyes focused despite the morphine. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for giving me the chance to repay an old debt." They loaded him into the helicopter. Maya watched him go, feeling something tight in her chest loosen slightly. One heartbeat saved, one debt honored, one promise kept. She turned to direct the next loading and nearly walked into Commander Shepard. He was standing close, watching her with an expression that was hard to read. 17 years, he said quietly. "I wondered what happened to you. You gave me a direct order to forget everything that happened in Anbar province," Maya said. I followed orders. That order was meant to protect you. It buried me. Shepard's jaw tightened. I know, and I've regretted that decision every day since. Before Maya could respond, a crew chief approached. Sir, we have one more wounded here. He's not on our battalion roster. Maya and Shepard exchanged a look. Then they moved to where the crew chief was pointing. A man lay on a makeshift litter, civilian outdoor gear under a torn Marine jacket, no identification tags. Gunshot wound to the abdomen, packed and stabilized but serious. Maya knelt beside him, checked his vitals, examined his wound. Professional, detached. Then she saw his shoulder, a tattoo, faded, partially covered by his shirt, but visible enough to recognize. CIA insignia. The man's eyes opened, focused on Maya, and recognition flashed across his face, followed immediately by fear. Dust Devil 3, he whispered. Operation Sandstorm. Maya's face went white. Her hands froze for just a moment before she forced them to keep working. She looked up at Shepard. Sir, we need to talk. Privately. Right now. Shepard saw her expression and understood immediately that whatever was happening was significant. He nodded and followed her a dozen steps away from the casualties and crew. Who is he? Shepard asked. Maya's voice was barely above a whisper. Nicholas Garrett, CIA case officer. He was our control for Sandstorm in 2007. Shepard's expression hardened. What's he doing here? The militia attack wasn't random, Maya said. She was talking fast now, putting pieces together. The weapons smuggling network we disrupted in Iraq in 2007, they didn't disappear. They evolved, moved operations stateside. Federal task force has been tracking them in this area. This training exercise accidentally put 280 Marines right next to their operation. They attacked to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses. Garrett must have been embedded with the Marines for surveillance. He was gathering intel. They identified him and tried to kill him. Shepard processed this. His face showed nothing, but Maya could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. If Garrett's identity is exposed, his cover is blown. Every operation he's worked for 20 years gets compromised. People die. Intelligence networks collapse. What do you need from me? Maya looked back at Garrett, at the crew preparing to load casualties, at the Marines watching everything. He needs immediate evacuation or he dies. But if we priority load him, the militia scouts watching will know he survived. We need to stage him as expectant, appears to be dying, gets loaded last, so they think he's not a threat. Shepard understood immediately. You'll stabilize him covertly while appearing to work on other casualties. Yes, sir. And you'll do this without anyone noticing what you're actually doing. I've done it before. Shepard looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Do it. Maya went back to work. To anyone watching, she was simply continuing to triage casualties, checking vitals, adjusting bandages, moving from patient to patient. But when she knelt beside Garrett, her hands were doing more than checking wounds. She was covertly stabilizing him, adjusting his IV drip to maximum flow, repositioning the packing on his wound to slow bleeding, administering medications that would keep his blood pressure up without anyone seeing her do it. She worked for 15 minutes. Then she stood and walked to Shepard. That one won't make it, she said loudly enough for nearby Marines to hear. But we don't leave bodies. Load him last. Shepard understood the code, played along. Copy that, load him with the delayed casualties. They evacuated in waves, first the immediate casualties, then the delayed, then the walking wounded who could sit in the helicopter instead of taking up litter space. Finally, they loaded Garrett. The crew chiefs handled him like someone who was already gone. But Maya had done her job. She had stabilized him enough to survive the flight. She had made the hard choice again, the same choice she had made in Anbar province in 2007. Save the one who matters most to the mission, even if it means others wait. The difference was that this time everyone else had also survived. The last helicopter prepared to lift. Shepard stood in the door, one hand on the frame, looking at Maya. Cross, I'm recommending you for Silver Star. This time it goes through. Sir, I don't need, not for you, Shepard interrupted. For every medic who served in the shadows, someone has to stand in the light. Let it be you. The helicopter lifted. Rotor wash blasted mud and rain, and Maya stood alone on the ridge watching it disappear into the darkness. Around her, the remaining Marines, those with minor wounds who could walk down to the river crossing, stood in loose formation, watching her, seeing her differently. Lance Corporal Sutton approached carefully. "Sergeant Thornhill, you crossed that water alone." Maya turned to face him, exhausted, soaked, covered in mud and blood. "Yes." "Why, how?" "Because someone had to." She walked past him toward the river. The rain was stopping now, the storm breaking. Dawn was still hours away, but the darkness felt less absolute. Behind her, Private Hollis, the one who had mocked her in the gym, whispered to Sutton, "She's not who they said she was." Sutton nodded slowly. "No, she's who her father raised her to be." And in that moment on that ridge with the river below and the storm breaking above, respect was finally earned. Not through speeches or explanations or defending her record, but through competence demonstrated when lives were on the line. Through choices made when no one else would make them. Through a river crossed alone because someone on the other side needed help and she was the only one willing to try by him. Maya reached the riverbank and looked at the water. It was calmer now, lower. The crossing back would be easier. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that she had crossed when it was hard, when it was dangerous, when everyone said it was impossible. She had crossed because her father's notebook said not to waste a heartbeat. And tonight she hadn't wasted one. The river looked different in the gray light of approaching dawn. Smaller somehow, less angry. The water that had tried to kill Maya 6 hours ago now moved with something closer to resignation than fury. The debris was gone. The violent churning had settled into steady current. Even the sound had changed from a roar that drowned out thought to a persistent whisper that said the worst was over. Maya stood at the edge of the far bank, looking across at the near side where the command post waited, where Colonel Reeves would have questions she didn't want to answer, where Lieutenant Foster would look at her differently, where Sergeant Harrison and his engineering team would know that every assumption they had made about the quiet medic who never spoke up had been built on carefully constructed lies. Behind her, 15 Marines with minor wounds formed up in loose ranks, walking wounded, bandaged and exhausted, but alive. They stood in silence, waiting for her to give the order to move. But Maya wasn't ready yet. She pulled out her father's green notebook. The cover was water-stained now. The pages would be damp. But the words inside, written 74 years ago by a man who had crossed his own frozen river, those words were permanent. She opened to a random page, her father's handwriting still clear despite the year's December 3rd, 1950. "Saved Corporal Webb today. Took 3 hours. Hands so cold I couldn't feel the sutures. But he lived. His wife sent me a letter thanking me for bringing him home. She's pregnant. Their daughter will be born in April. That's what we're fighting for. Not the big victories, the small ones, the heartbeats that continue." Maya closed the notebook carefully, placed it back in her cargo pocket. That daughter, born in April 1951, had grown up and had children of her own. And one of those children was Marcus Webb, 22 years old, currently in a helicopter heading toward a hospital where surgeons would save his leg because Maya had bought him time. 4 generations of heartbeats, all because 2 medics separated by 74 years and 2 different wars had refused to accept that distance made saving someone impossible. "Sergeant Thornhill." She turned. Lance Corporal Blake Sutton stood a respectful distance away. The same Marine who had been pressing too wide on Webb's arterial wound. The same one who had whispered jokes about the paperwork medic back at Fort Bradford. His face was different now. Older somehow, despite only 6 hours passing. Combat does that. It ages you in ways that have nothing to do with time. "We're ready to cross when you are, ma'am." Maya looked at the 15 Marines behind him. Some had bandaged arms. Others had wrapped heads or limped on injured legs. But they stood straight, waiting for her word. "Form up," she said quietly. "We'll use the engineer bridges. Safe and slow. If anyone feels dizzy or weak, speak up immediately." "Understood." "Yes, ma'am." They moved toward the engineer bridges that had been reinforced during the night. The rope lines were taut now, secure. The crossing that had been treacherous 12 hours ago was manageable in the growing light. But Maya didn't take the bridge. She walked to where the emergency raft had been repositioned, the same raft she had used to cross into chaos. Someone, probably Sergeant Harrison, had retrieved it from downstream and prepared it for her return. She stepped into it alone. Sutton called out, "Sergeant, you can use the bridge. It's safe now." Maya picked up the paddle. I crossed this river alone to reach you. I'll cross it alone to go back. Some things you finish the way you started them. She pushed off before anyone could argue. The current was gentler now, but Maya's muscles remembered the earlier crossing. Her hands knew exactly where to place the paddle. Her body understood the rhythm of water and momentum. She crossed in 8 minutes, smooth and controlled the raft, barely rocking. When she reached the near bank, she saw them. The entire battalion. 200 Marines who should have been resting or eating or doing anything other than standing in formation along the riverbank at dawn. But they were there, standing at attention, silent. At the front stood Colonel Thomas Reeves, Lieutenant Daniel Foster beside him. Behind them, row after row of Marines who had heard what happened, who had listened to radio transmissions of a medic working alone under fire, who had waited through the night wondering if she would make it back. Maya pulled the raft onto the bank, shouldered her medical bag, stood at the water's edge covered in dried mud and blood, her uniform torn, her boots caked with river silt. She didn't know what to do. She had expected anger, disciplinary action, maybe arrest for disobeying direct orders. She had not expected this. Colonel Reeves stepped forward, came to attention, and saluted. Behind him, every single Marine raised their hand in unison. 200 salutes held in perfect stillness. No one spoke. No one moved. Just that gesture that meant more than words ever could. Maya's eyes stung. She forced the emotion down, came to attention, and returned the salute, holding it for what felt like forever. Then Reeves dropped his salute and walked forward. He stopped 3 feet from her, and his face was unreadable. "Sergeant Thornhill," he said, his voice carrying across the silent formation. "On behalf of this battalion and every Marine who made it home because of your actions last night, thank you." He extended his hand. Maya took it. His grip was firm, respectful. "Sir, I disobeyed your direct order. I'm prepared to face consequences." "You saved 5 lives that would have been lost if you had followed orders," Reeves had said quietly. "Sometimes the right choice and the legal choice aren't the same thing. I'm putting you in for Silver Star. Commander Shepard already started the paperwork. I'm endorsing it." "Sir, that's not necessary." "It's not about what's necessary, Sergeant. It's about what's true." He paused, then added even more quietly, "Commander Shepard briefed me on your actual service record. Cobra Dust, Operation Sandstorm. What really happened in 2007? Maya tensed. "The classified portions remain classified," Reeves continued. "But your combat experience, your training, your capabilities, those don't need to be secret anymore. Your record is being updated, not the missions, but enough that people will understand you're not who we thought you were." "I never wanted recognition, sir." "That's exactly why you deserve it." Reeves stepped back and gestured toward the command tent. "Get cleaned up, get some food. You've been running on adrenaline for 8 hours. That bill always comes due." Maya nodded, started to walk toward the tent. "Thornhill," Reeves called after her. She stopped, turned back. "Your father would be proud." Maya's throat tightened. She managed a small nod, then continued walking before her composure could crack. Behind her, the formation began to disperse, but Marines kept looking back at her, seeing her differently, understanding slowly that the person they had dismissed was actually the person who had saved their friends. Private Garrett Hollis stood near the command post staring at Maya like he was seeing a ghost. "I called her a paperwork princess," he whispered to the Marine beside him. "I made jokes. God, I was such an idiot." The other Marine, Private Graham Sterling, the one who had almost fallen during the initial crossing, shook his head. "We all were. Question is, what do we do about it now?" Hollis thought about that. Then he walked toward where Maya was heading. She had stopped near the medical supply tent, dropping her bag, preparing to inventory what she had used so it could be restocked. Even now, exhausted and running on nothing but willpower, she was still working. "Sergeant Thornhill." She turned, saw Hollis. Her expression didn't change. No anger, no judgment, just patient waiting. "I owe you an apology," Hollis said. "What I said back at Bradford, the jokes, the disrespect, I was wrong and I'm sorry." Maya studied him for a moment. "You were doing what everyone does, judging what you don't understand. We all make assumptions. The question is whether you learn from them. Why didn't you ever correct us, tell us you deployed, that you had combat experience? Because I didn't need you to know, I needed to know." She paused, then added, And because some stories are better left classified until they need to be told. Can I ask you something? Maya waited. How did you learn to cross rivers like that? That wasn't training, that was something else. For a long moment, Maya didn't answer. She just looked past Hollis toward the river, toward the far bank where she had worked in mud and darkness to keep hearts beating. Anbar Province, she said finally. 2007, the Euphrates River. I crossed under fire to reach wounded who couldn't wait for safe conditions. I learned that sometimes courage isn't about being ready. It's about going anyway. And the triage, the way you organized everything, the way you commanded without actually commanding. I learned that in places that don't exist in official records. From people whose names will never be on memorials. From medics who served in shadows because someone had to. She picked up her medical bag. Get some rest, Hollis. You did good work out there. You kept Webb alive until I arrived. That matters. She walked away before he could respond, leaving him standing there with the weight of understanding settling on his shoulders. The command tent was organized case. Officers coordinating with federal authorities about the militia incident. Intelligence personnel documenting everything. Communications specialists trying to piece together what had happened and why. In the middle of it all stood Commander James Shepard. He had stayed after the evacuation, and now he stood over a map talking quietly with Colonel Reeves. He looked up when Maya entered. Their eyes met across the tent, and 17 years of buried history hung in the air between them. Sergeant Thornhill, Shepard said formally. A word outside, they walked away from the tent, away from listening ears, until they stood by the river where the morning light was turning the water from gray to something almost gold. Shepard spoke first. 17 years ago, I gave you a direct order to never speak about Operation Sandstorm, to forget everything that happened that night in Anbar Province, to accept reassignment and let the story die. I followed that order, sir. I know you did, and I've regretted giving it every single day since. He turned to face her. You made an impossible choice that night. Save the wounded you could see or protect the intelligence asset who was hidden. You chose the mission. 2 Delta operators died because you prioritized the informant. Maya's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Their families wanted answers, Shepard continued. They wanted to know why a medic was with their loved ones and didn't save them. They couldn't know about the informant. They couldn't know about Sandstorm, so we buried it all, dissolved Cobra dust, scattered the personnel, and we let a rumor spread that you had frozen under fire. To discredit me if I ever spoke. To protect you, Shepard said firmly. If the families had known the truth that you made a tactical decision to let their sons die, they would have destroyed you. The media would have crucified you. You were 24 years old. I was trying to save your career. You buried me instead. I know. Shepard's voice was heavy with something that might have been regret. I know I did. And I can't fix the past. But I can make damn sure your present isn't defined by it. He handed her a folder. Official papers with Department of Defense letterhead. Your full service record. We declassified what could be declassified. Combat medical badge from Iraq. 2 Bronze Stars with valor that were previously classified. Multiple commendations that had been buried. It's not everything Sandstorm stays classified, but it's enough. Maya opened the folder, saw her own name attached to citations she had earned but never received. Decorations that had existed only in sealed files. The informant you protected that night, Shepard said quietly. His intelligence led to the disruption of a major weapons trafficking network. Saved hundreds of lives, maybe thousands. The 2 operators who died their sacrifice had meaning. You made sure of that. Their families don't know that. No, and they never will. That's the price of working in shadows. He paused. But tonight you worked in the light. Everyone saw what you did. No one can take that away from you. No one can bury this story. Maya closed the folder. What about Garrett, the CIA officer? He'll survive. You bought him enough time. His cover's intact as far as the militia knows. He was just another casualty who didn't make it. The operation continues. Shepard's eyes were sharp. You made the right call again. Staging him as expectant so they wouldn't target him during evacuation. That was smart. It was the same choice I made in 2007. I know, but this time everyone lived. He gestured toward the folder in her hands. Take that. Show it to anyone who asks. Let them know that the medic who crossed the river last night had crossed rivers before. Let the truth, as much of it as we can tell, speak for itself. Maya looked at the folder, at the recognition that had been locked away for 17 years, at the proof that she had served with honor even when no one knew it. My father used to say that a medic's real reward is the heartbeats that keep going, she said quietly. That medals don't matter as much as lives saved. Your father was right, but sometimes the world needs to see the medals so they understand that the lives were saved by someone who knew what they were doing, someone who earned the right to be trusted. Shepard straightened to attention, saluted one more time. Thank you, Sergeant Thornhill, for your service then, and for your courage now. He walked away, leaving Maya standing by the river with a folder full of truths that had waited 17 years to see daylight. 2 days later, back at Fort Bradford, life tried to return to normal. The battalion came home to media attention that the military quickly contained. The militia incident was reported as isolated contact with armed individuals during training exercise. The details remained classified. The full story would never be public. But within the battalion, everyone knew. Maya returned to her desk in the administration building. Same small office, same paperwork, same routine that had defined her life for 12 years. Except everything was different. When she walked into the building that first morning, BAC Marines stood when she entered. Not because regulations required it, because respect demanded it. Corporal Rachel Brennan was waiting by Maya's desk, the medic who had worked alongside her for 8 months without knowing anything about her past. I've been doing this job for 5 years, Brennan said without preamble. I thought I was pretty good at it. Then I watched you work through radio reports and realized I don't know anything. Maya set down her coffee. You know plenty, you just haven't had to use it under pressure yet. Will you teach me what you know? If you wanted to learn, yes, but Rachel. Maya paused, choosing words carefully. Hope you never need it the way I did. Hope you never have to make the choices I made. Because those choices don't leave you. They stay with you. Every face, every name, every heartbeat you saved, and every one you couldn't. Brennan nodded slowly. I still want to learn. Then we'll start tomorrow. Come early. We'll go through advanced trauma procedures. Brennan smiled, started to leave, turned back. Maya, thank you for showing us what's possible. After she left, Maya sat at her desk and stared at the stack of medical reports waiting to be filed. The same boring paperwork she had been doing for years. But now she understood something her father had tried to teach her. That service comes in many forms. That sometimes you cross rivers under fire, and sometimes you file paperwork that keeps the system running so others can do their jobs. Both matter. Both are necessary. The quiet work is still work. The invisible service is still service. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize with a Washington, D.C. area code. Sergeant Thornhill. Sergeant, this is General Morrison's office. The General would like to see you at 1400 hours. Dress uniform. Please confirm. Maya's heart rate increased slightly. A general didn't summon sergeants in dress uniform for casual conversations. Confirmed. I'll be there. At 1400 hours exactly, Maya stood outside General Morrison's office in dress uniform that she had to dig out of her wall locker and steam the wrinkles out of. She knocked. Enter. General Morrison was in his early 60s, square-shouldered, gray-haired, combat infantry badge from Desert Storm, where he had served as a young officer. He stood when Maya entered. That alone was unusual. Sergeant Thornhill, at ease. Have a seat. Maya sat back straight, hands folded in her lap. Morrison studied her for a long moment. Then he opened a folder on his desk. I've been reading your file, your actual file, not the sanitized version that's been floating around for 12 years. He looked up. Cobra Dust, Task Force Sierra Echo, Operation Sandstorm, 37 missions in 18 months, 7 lives saved under direct fire, 2 Bronze Stars, Combat Medical Badge, and then he paused. Administrative reassignment, buried service record, career effectively frozen. Yes, sir. Why didn't you fight it? Why didn't you challenge the reassignment? Because I was given a direct order, sir, and because some stories are better buried than explained. Morrison nodded slowly. Commander Shepard told me what really happened that night in Umbar province. The choice you made, the operators who died, the informant who lived. He closed the folder. That's the kind of choice that destroys most people. The fact that you're still serving, still functioning, tells me everything I need to know about your character. He stood and walked to his window, looked out at the base beyond. Next week there will be a ceremony. Small, private, no media. I will be presenting you with the Silver Star for your action at Serpent River. Commander Shepard will present your combat medical badge and bronze stars that were previously classified. Your record will be officially updated. Sir, that's not necessary, Morrison turned sharply. Don't. His voice had steel in it. Don't tell me it's not necessary. Don't be humble about this. You've been humble for 12 years. You've been invisible. You've let people mock you and doubt you and dismiss you because that's what you were ordered to do. But that order has been rescinded. Do you understand me, Sergeant? Yes, sir. Some soldiers serve in sunlight where everyone sees. Others serve in shadows where only results speak. You've done both. The world needs to know that courage like yours exists. Not for your sake. For every young medic who needs to understand that this job matters. That service in the shadows is still service. He sat back down. His voice softened slightly. Your father served in our area. He saved lives that no one remembers. But those lives mattered. They had children and grandchildren. Their heartbeats continued because he refused to give up. You did the same thing at Serpent River, in Iraq. Everywhere you've served, and it's time people knew. Maya's eyes were stinging. She blinked it back. Sir, my father always said the real reward is the heartbeats that keep going. That's enough. For you, maybe, but not for the rest of us. Morrison picked up a letter from his desk. This came from Private Webb's mother. She wrote to thank the battalion for saving her son, but she specifically asked about the medic who crossed the river. She wanted to know your name because her father-in-law, Marcus Webb's grandfather, was saved by a medic in Korea. She wanted to thank you for keeping that legacy alive. He handed the letter to Maya. She read it, saw the words about gratitude and legacy and heartbeats that continue through generations. Saw the photograph enclosed young Thomas Webb in 1951, holding his newborn daughter, the daughter who would one day be Marcus's mother. 4 generations of life because 2 medics refused to accept that distance made saving someone impossible. Sometimes, Morrison said quietly, the work we do echoes longer than we know. Your father's work echoed for 74 years. Your work will echo even longer. The ceremony was held 1 week later in a small room with no media present, just the command staff, the Marines who had been at Serpent River, and a few others who needed to be there. Maya stood at attention in her dress uniform, her father's green notebook tucked in an interior pocket where no one could see it, but she could feel its weight. General Morrison presented the Silver Star, pinned it to her uniform with words about conspicuous gallantry and courage under fire. Commander Shepard presented the Combat Medical Badge and 2 bronze stars that had existed in classified files for 17 years. He didn't make a speech. He just looked her in the eye and nodded once, understanding passing between them that needed no words. When it was over, when the official portion ended and people began to disperse, Lieutenant Foster approached. Sergeant Thackenhill, I owe you an apology. I should have shut down the jokes back at Bradford. I should have given you the benefit of the doubt. That's what leadership is supposed to do. Maya looked at him. You didn't know what you didn't know. The question is whether you learned. I did, and if you ever need anything recommendation to support backup, you call me. Understood. Understood, sir. After Foster left, Lance Corporal Sutton approached with something wrapped in cloth. Sergeant, some of us wanted you to have this. He handed it to her. Maya unwrapped it carefully. It was a patch, custom made. It showed a river with a raft crossing under a full moon. Words stitched around the border. Serpent River, April 2024. 1 medic, 280 Marines, 0 quit. We all chipped in, Sutton said. Thought you should have something to remember. Maya's throat was tight. She looked at the patch, at the care that had gone into making it, and understood that this meant more than any official medal ever could. Thank you, she managed. I'll treasure this. That night alone in her quarters, Maya sat at her small desk with 2 green notebooks side by side. Her father's from Korea, her own that she had started keeping after Serpent River. She opened hers to the first page and began to write, April 14th, 2024, Dad. Today I understood what you meant about heartbeats, not just the ones we save in the moment, but the ones that continue after. Marcus Webb lives. His future children will exist because of choices made on a muddy riverbank. Your choice in Korea to save Thomas Webb. My choice to cross that river for his grandson. Legacy isn't about medals or recognition. It's about the chain of heartbeats we protect generation after generation. The notebook you gave me said, do not waste a heartbeat you can save. I haven't. I won't. And someday I'll pass this forward to another medic who needs to understand that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and going anyway. The river tried to kill me. The enemy shot at me. My own fear told me to stop. But I kept going because that's what you taught me. Keep going even when every logical part of your brain screams that you should quit. Keep going because someone on the other side needs you. I think you'd be proud, not of the medals, I know you never cared about those, but of the Marines who went home, of the grandfather's debt paid forward, of the quiet service that matters more than loud recognition. Thank you for teaching me that some battles are fought with rifles, but the most important ones are fought with gauze and pressure and refusing to give up on a single heartbeat. Your daughter, Maya. She closed the notebook, placed it beside her father's. 2 generations, same mission, same understanding that the work matters more than the recognition. On the wall above her desk, she hung the patch from Sutton and the other Marines. Right next to a photograph of her father in his Korean War uniform, young and serious, a medic bag over his shoulder. She looked at that photograph for a long time. I crossed my river, Dad, she whispered, just like you crossed yours. And somewhere down the line, someone else will cross theirs because we showed them it was possible. The next morning, Maya reported to the training grounds where new medics were going through their initial field exercises. Young soldiers fresh from basic, nervous about whether they had what it took. She stood in front of them in her duty uniform, the silver star visible on her chest now. No longer hidden, no longer buried. When you're in the field, she began, her voice carrying across the formation, you'll face choices. Some will be easy bandage, a scrape, splint, a fracture. Others will tear you apart. When those moments come, remember this. You're not just saving a life, you're protecting every life that life will touch, every child they'll have, every person they'll help, every moment of joy they'll experience. That's what a heartbeat means. A young medic raised her hand. Sergeant Thornhill, what if we're not strong enough? Maya looked at her, saw herself at that age, full of doubt and hope and fear. You won't know until you try. But I can tell you this courage isn't about being the strongest or the bravest. It's about being the one who doesn't quit. The river will try to drown you. The enemy will shoot at you. Your own fear will tell you to stop. Keep going anyway. Another medic, what if we fail? Then you learn, you adapt, you try again. But you never ever give up on a heartbeat you can save. That's the promise we make when we put on this uniform. That's the oath we take. And that's the legacy we pass forward. She looked at them all, saw the doubt and the determination mixing in equal measure. My father was a medic in Korea. He taught me that this job isn't about glory. It's about being there when someone needs you most. About crossing whatever river stands between you and someone who's dying. About refusing to accept that distance or danger or fear makes saving someone impossible. She pulled out her father's green notebook, showed them the worn cover. He carried this through the Korean War, saved lives that no one remembers. But those lives mattered. They had children and grandchildren. Heartbeats that continue because one medic refused to give up. She paused. Last week I crossed a flooded river alone to reach wounded Marines. I did it because one of them was the grandson of a man my father saved 74 years ago. I did it because some debts echo through generations. And I did it because that's what we do. We cross the rivers. We face the fear. We save the heartbeats. She closed the notebook. Put it back in her pocket. You'll carry your own notebooks someday. Fill them with your own stories. And somewhere down the line, another medic will read what you wrote and find the courage to cross their river because you showed them it was possible. The training session continued. Maya taught them advanced trauma procedures. showed them how to improvise when supplies ran out, explained how to read a tactical situation and position casualties for evacuation. But more than techniques, she taught them something harder to quantify. She taught them that service in shadows still matters, that quiet courage is still courage, that the work you do when no one's watching counts just as much as the work under spotlights. She taught them what her father had taught her. Don't waste a heartbeat you can save. And that afternoon, as the sun set over Fort Bradford, Maya Thornhill stood on a hill overlooking the base and thought about rivers. The Chosin Reservoir in Korea, where her father had crossed frozen hell. The Euphrates in Iraq, where she had learned that courage sometimes means making impossible choices. The Serpent River, where she had finally understood that her father's lessons weren't just philosophy, they were survival. Every river is different. Every crossing demands something unique. But the principle remains the same. When someone on the other side needs you, you find a way across. Not because you're fearless, not because you're special, not because you want recognition, but because you're a medic. And that's what medics do. They cross rivers, they save heartbeats, they keep the legacy alive. And somewhere in a hospital bed recovering from surgery, Private Marcus Webb held his mother's hand and told her about the medic who had crossed a river alone to save him. She said, "My grandfather lived because her father refused to give up," Marcus said. She said that's what legacy means, that we're all connected through the heartbeats that continue. His mother, whose father was Thomas Webb, who had been saved at Chosin, wiped tears from her eyes. "Your grandfather talked about that medic until the day he died," she said. "He said that man gave him his life back, gave him the chance to come home and have children and watch them grow up. He said he owed everything to a medic who refused to let him die in the snow." She held up a photograph. Young Douglas Thornhill in his Korean War uniform. She had found it in her father's belongings after he died. He kept this his whole life, never forgot the man who saved him. She looked at her son, and now that man's daughter saved you. Maybe that's what the world needs. People who refuse to give up on each other, who cross rivers because someone on the other side needs them. Marcus stared at the photograph, at the young medic who would one day have a daughter, who would one day save his life. "I want to meet her," he said. "I want to thank her." "You will when you're healed." "But Marcus," his mother's voice was serious now, "you honor her best not just with thanks, but by living well, by being the person she risked her life to save, by making her choice worth it." Marcus nodded, understanding settling on him like a weight and a gift at the same time. He was alive because of choices made across generations. Because medics refused to accept that distance made saving someone impossible. Because courage sometimes looks like a person alone in a raft crossing a river that everyone else said was uncrossable. He was alive because someone had honored a debt that most people didn't even know existed. And that life, that continuation of heartbeats, was the greatest recognition any medic could ever receive. Not medals, not ceremonies, not speeches, but lives that continue, families that remain whole, futures that still have a chance to happen. That's what Maya Thornhill had crossed the river for. And that's why in the quiet moments late at night when doubt crept in, she would open her father's notebook and read those words one more time. "Do not waste a heartbeat you can save." She hadn't wasted one, not in Korea, not in Iraq, not at Serpent River, and she never would. Because some rivers demand to be crossed, some heartbeats demand to be saved, and some legacies demand to be honored. This was hers, and it would echo long after the last page of her notebook was filled, long after the medals tarnished and the ceremonies faded from memory. It would echo in the heartbeats that continued, in the children not yet born who would exist because someone crossed a river, in the Marines who went home to their families, in the quiet understanding that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is the person standing at the river's edge, knowing the odds, understanding the risk, and going anyway. Because someone on the other side needs them, and that's enough. That's always been enough, and that will always be enough. The river waits for no one, but the brave cross it anyway.